So once you click on it, of course, the text box will open up. After you click resubmit, that is, type in 3 major points. So stimulating the economy. So we're talking about expanding the economy. There is a time when you can contract the economy, and that's when it looks like inflation is too high, and the government should take the opposite actions of what we're talking about here today. But typically, stimulating the economy happens, at least politically, through the fiscal policy, and that is the government's influence, particularly the legislative branch, over the economy. So fiscal policy is going to be operated by Congress. It can also be done by the state legislatures, but they typically don't have as much money and they can't borrow like the federal government can. But basically, the goal of expanding the economy through fiscal policy is to boost employment levels and economic development and make sure that the economy's growth rate is positive and at least 2 to 3%. It's unusual for an older industrialized economy like the United States to be higher than that, so people would like it to be 4 or 5, but 2 or 3 is a pretty good goal to go for. And of course, raising the standard of living, which means also lifting people out of poverty, and then making sure that the middle class in particular is still able to consume and spend, because otherwise the economy is not going to be doing well. So some of the tools that they have includes taxation, because there are a lot of different taxes on different types of aspects of life, including sales tax and income tax, property tax, corporate taxes, and so on. And what they can do with taxation, obviously, is to lower taxes, particularly for people. They can lower them, hoping that people will take that extra money they're keeping in their paychecks and go out and spend it. They'll buy things. More people will be hired to make those things. Those people will have money. They'll buy things and so on. The other thing would be public spending, which can be on a variety of things: transfer payments, welfare, public works projects. And a lot of this happened during the New Deal and the Great Depression with spending programs in order to help lift people up. And Congress, of course, and the United States government is the biggest consumer in the world, so they buy a lot of products, they hire a lot of people, and supposedly this can also help expand the economy. And so expanding has some difficulties that go with it. Taxation, for instance, the middle class and the upper class, the rich, they tend to save their money. The middle class also tends to pay down bills, and that doesn't necessarily help the economy because they're not going out and buying anything. And then the rich typically save money and invest, but they put their money in the stock market, and that causes stock prices to go up, but that doesn't mean those companies will then hire more people. So none of those are necessarily guaranteed to help out overall. They do help, obviously, people make ends meet in the meantime, but otherwise it doesn't necessarily help expand the economy. And the problem with public spending is, in order to make deals in Congress, you have to get all 535 members of both the House and the Senate to agree, and so they end up putting together a big legislative package that covers many different areas, so you don't necessarily have spending going into one particular industry or marketplace. And not only that, it takes Congress a long time to get things done, and then a long time for it to spend the money underneath the executive branch. So it can also be timely in how long it exactly takes to make an impact. Another problem, of course, is that it can also create a deficit, which means they're going to end up spending more money than they have on hand. For instance, but the COVID bill that was passed earlier, that ended up being for a considerable amount of money, and it drove up the deficits by, 100 or 200% at least. So the Congress ended up spending a lot more money than it planned originally this year than it had in the past, and definitely more than they brought in taxes. So they're probably going to drive up the debt by maybe $1, $2, $3 trillion altogether when it's all said and done. The ideal, of course, would be to have a surplus, and then you can use that to expand the economy, but Congress isn't good about keeping surpluses. And then something else that we'll talk more about later is the monetary policy. That's different than fiscal policy. It involves controlling the money supply through the buying and selling of bonds and interest rates. That's all done by the Federal Reserve, our central banking system, and it can be done in coordination with the fiscal policy. However, there's a lot of evidence to show that the monetary policy is much more impactful because it can be immediate result, basically an immediate reaction, and it can help bolster banks and investing, things like that. And so there's a lot of evidence to show that monetary policy does a pretty good job. And plus, the Federal Reserve is always keeping track of the economy. They just don't wake up one day and say, well, there's a recession, maybe we should do something about it. like politicians do. They're always keeping track of it because that's their job. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the chart. This works the same as in microeconomics. We have a supply chart, except it's known as aggregate supply, the supply of everything. So bulldozers, cars, shovels, shirts, blouses, kittens, whatever you want to say is being sold, that's all in this aggregate supply, the supply of all goods and services. And this is over the short run, by the way. This is over the short run. And then we have aggregate demand. And so maybe this is during the recession, aggregate demand. So this is the demand, the consumption of all goods and services, everything that everybody's buying. And so in year one, we're in a recession, so we want to say by next year, we want to be out of it. So when they do these things, when they lower taxes or increase public spending, or some of the stuff the Federal Reserve can do, the hope is that demand will increase up to here. And then we'll have this new aggregate demand line, AD2. And so real national output, the gross domestic product, we're hoping would go from here up to here. So that would be our new national output. So that is the hope demonstrated, of course, in this graph.